From CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to this special one-hour edition of Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede, and today we will have interviews with candidates for Congress and the state Senate. We will also investigate why you may be on the hook for some questionable charges clearing debris from Hurricane Ian. But we start with newly released videos from the arrests of 20 people for alleged voter fraud. In August, Governor Ron DeSantis touted these arrests in a press conference in Broward County, saying that these 20 convicted felons illegally voted in the 2020 election. Of course, what the governor failed to point out is that the state had issued them voter registration cards telling them they were eligible to vote. And as you can see from this police body cam video, both the officers and the people being arrested seemed confused by what was happening.
I'm like, voter fraud? I voted, but I ain't commit no fraud.
Well, so that's the thing. I don't know exactly what happened with it, but you do have a warrant. That's what it's. Yeah, I know. I don't know, man. I honestly couldn't tell you, okay?
About some voter fraud, voter stuff, when you weren't supposed to be voting, maybe.
Oh, my God, man. What
The reason for the confusion is that ever since voters in Florida overwhelmingly approved Amendment 4, restoring the rights of convicted felons, the state hasn't been able to develop a list as to who the law applies to and who it doesn't. So you had the state telling people they were eligible to vote and then arresting them 2 years later for actually voting. I spoke to Neil Volz with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Neil, I want to start by getting your reaction to what you were thinking when you saw the videos of the arrests.
I was heartbroken when I saw those videos for the first time and just seeing Florida citizens getting arrested for voting and watching their reactions and how they were excited to vote. And now years later, they're being arrested and the confusion and even the interaction with law enforcement. It was such a personal, humanizing moment. It really put a face on this broken system that we're trying to fix and that we're dealing with right now.
You know, it wasn't just that they were confused. You got the sense from the law enforcement officers who were, executing these arrest warrants that even they seemed a bit dumbfounded.
You're 100% right, where they weren't real sure what the charges were or what the contours of what they were arresting somebody for, and just the back and forth, almost giving legal advice in certain cases. It was very eye-opening. It was a human moment. It was a sad moment.
So how did it come to this? Why do you think we had these 20 arrests, a big press conference by the governor? What do you think's behind this?
Well, you know what? There's a long story here. I mean, we've had problems with the voter verification system for people with past convictions in this state since back in the Bush v. Gore time. And now we're seeing these problems just multiply post Amendment 4 because so many more people are now getting into the voting system that the problems are magnifying. And then, last summer, there's a gentleman who sent thousands of names to law enforcement all across the state to begin these investigations. So we know that there are thousands of families across Florida who are worried, who are, apprehensive about voting, when really we should be celebrating voting. We should be, encouraging people to get out into the community. And so, then we had this moment in August where 20 of those individuals were arrested all on the same day. And we got to see what we've seen in these videos, and it really comes home.
Yeah, well, now let's be clear. Under the law, they are not entitled to vote. They do not qualify under the blanket exemption created by Amendment 4. However, they were led to believe they could vote. They were, in many cases, given voter registration cards, issued by their local Department of Elections, even the state, even in, throughout the state, this was happening. So, I realize that in a lot of ways, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. We understand that policy, but there is usually the need for some sort of intention to intentionally want to break the law, defraud the public, to do something that you know is not right. that still seems to be a real problem here in this case, isn't it?
No, that's 100% right. I mean, even if you look at what the Lake County state attorney did in terms of choosing to not bring charges against people in a similar situation because there was no way to prove intent. What we're talking about are the different legal standards between removing somebody from the voting rolls because the facts appear to say that they're not eligible versus charging somebody and potentially depriving them of their liberty, in which you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they intended to commit fraud. And as you can see in these videos, that is not the response of anyone who was in that situation. They were shocked that this was even happening. That is not the profile of somebody committing fraud.
Do you think this was a political stunt by the governor?
I think it occurred in the context of politics. It's hard for me to really get into the intent of everybody's moves. And man, I got a felony conviction myself, so I'm a little sensitive to assigning labels and motives, but there's been a huge impact, I can tell you that. In the community, this has created a lot of anxiety. There's nervousness and confusion, but there's also some energy developing in which we're beginning to see people want to respond to this by getting friends and neighbors and loved ones into the voting system and into making sure that their voices are heard in this process.
Are you afraid, though, that that may be the result? Is that as a result of this, people who have had their rights restored, felons who are now legitimately, legally able to vote, may think twice about voting for fear that suddenly, FDLE agents might come knocking on their door?
Yeah, that is a worry that we have. And that's why we're spending so much time trying to, spin this the other way around. It would be heartbreaking to know that somebody who is eligible to vote, who's desperate to have their voice heard in the community, somehow sits this out. But we also know that there are some people who might still be unsure. And we're encouraging and challenging them to continue with the spirit that got Amendment 4 passed in the first place, which is to go out and talk to our friends and our neighbors and our loved ones and say, hey, be my voice in this moment. Take my voice into the voting booth with you. And we think that this could turn into an opportunity to get even more people civically engaged because there's a lot of energy out there right now.
You noted that you're a convicted felon. You had your rights restored, and you were able to vote for the first time in a long time in 2020. Just talk to me about what that felt like to be able to vote again.
It felt like I was taking part in this kind of sacred act. I mean, I remember almost walking into the booth in slow motion, taking everything in, going through the process of voting, and then opening that curtain back up. And I just started crying. I was hugging people I didn't even know. I was overwhelmed. It was way more of an emotional experience than I anticipated. I mean, I've been working on this, for years. And so there's a piece of this. It's just, hey, I dedicate my life to democracy and to people being able to, embrace their second chances and become part of the community again. And it was just an overwhelming experience for me.
What do you think should happen to these 20 individuals who have been arrested?
From my vantage point, I would like to see the cases get dismissed. Until the government can verify voter eligibility in the front line, we shouldn't be arresting anybody, and so I would love to see us channel all this energy and these resources and this money into fixing the system on the front end so that we don't have to deal with these kind of things going forward.
In other words, and I think you're raising a very important point, in other words, if when these people had applied, because they didn't just show up, they didn't present a false ID, they didn't pretend to be someone else, they actually went through the process of applying for a voter registration card, and they were given them. And the reason why that took place is because the state, the counties are so bad at processing, understanding who is eligible and who is not, that the state is confused. So the state, in a state of confusion, issues cards to individuals who are confused themselves. And yet it's only those individuals who are now being held liable, even though the state was incompetent in how it handled it on the front end, as you're saying. That's the part that you're saying needs to be fixed.
100%, right? If people could get verification on the front end, then we wouldn't see this confusion that you're talking about. Because if you can't count on the state to tell you whether you're eligible or not. Who can you count on? And it's really hard, I think, for anyone to suggest when you get a voter ID card that there's any other way to interpret that except, oh, wow, the state's telling me that I'm eligible to vote so that I can go vote. Any other message, it's hard for me to see how somebody can interpret that. So if we could clean that up on the front end, because you're right, there are people involved who might not be eligible to vote. And we should be able to tell people that on the front end. But to let them stay for a couple years on the rolls, in some cases get new voter ID cards after moving to a different address, that's just a system that's broken. That's a system that's setting us up for these kind of conversations. You know, it would be wonderful to be talking about how we can help employers hire people with past convictions and set up systems so that everyone can thrive, rather than talking about a broken election system and the resulting arrests that we've seen.
On Friday, a Miami-Dade judge dismissed the first of the 20 cases, saying the statewide prosecutor overstepped his authority in these arrests. The state is expected to appeal, but when we come back, we will talk to an attorney with the ACLU Voting Rights Project who predicted 2 years ago the state would pull a stunt like this. Stay with us.